In 2009, Susan Boyle walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent as an unknown woman from a small Scottish village, and less than 3 minutes later became one of the most recognizable voices in the world almost overnight. Millions of viewers saw her as a symbol of late success and unexpected opportunity. Her story resonated strongly with audiences who related to her background, her vulnerability, and her sudden rise to fame. But over time, her public appearances gradually became less frequent. There was no dramatic farewell announcement. Instead, media attention surrounding her slowly became less intense, while Susan Boyle dealt with personal and health-related challenges largely outside public attention, including the pressure of sudden global fame, long periods of isolation, and ongoing health concerns that affected both her daily life and career. Eventually, new concerns emerged about how those health struggles could affect her ability to continue performing. But what happens when the talent that transformed your life begins facing limitations brought by time, pressure, and health challenges? What happens when a singer whose voice inspired millions must adapt to a very different stage of life? Have you ever felt like life changed faster than you were emotionally prepared for? Leave a comment below, because that feeling became an important part of Susan Boyle's public journey. In 2022, Susan Boyle suffered a stroke that affected both her speech and singing ability. For several months, she largely stepped away from public appearances while focusing on recovery. The singer, whose voice had once stunned global audiences, was suddenly working to regain confidence in both her speech and singing ability. Later, she publicly stated that she fought like crazy to recover skills affected by the stroke. But Susan Boyle's story did not begin on the stage of Britain's Got Talent. It began in a small working-class town in Scotland, where a quiet young girl often felt isolated and socially excluded during childhood. Long before international fame, best-selling albums, and television appearances, Susan Boyle lived a life shaped by financial hardship, family responsibilities, and ambitions that appeared difficult to achieve from her circumstances. Her story moved through years spent caring for her mother, while much of her adult life remained centered around family obligations, through difficult auditions and public criticism, through the emotional pressure of becoming globally famous almost overnight, and eventually into serious health challenges that affected the singing ability central to her career. Her story ultimately became about much more than sudden fame. It became a story about resilience, isolation, and how sudden success can also create enormous emotional pressure. Stay with us, because before Susan Boyle became internationally famous, she was a largely unknown woman living a quiet life outside public attention who had spent many years believing major success was unlikely. Susan Boyle was born on April 1, 1961, in Blackburn, West Lothian, Scotland, the youngest of 10 children in a crowded working-class household. Her father, Patrick Boyle, worked as a miner and occasionally performed music, while her mother, Bridget, worked as a shorthand typist. Music remained an important part of family life, and Susan herself became known as a quiet child who often appeared sensitive and emotionally reserved. From an early age, however, she also experienced medical and social challenges. Susan's birth was difficult, and for many years, doctors and teachers believed she had learning difficulties connected to oxygen deprivation during delivery. Later in life, she received a diagnosis on the autism spectrum, which helped explain many of the social struggles she experienced growing up. As a child, she became aware that she struggled socially in ways that made her feel different from many classmates. School was often a difficult and isolating experience for Susan. While other children moved quickly through lessons, she struggled inside a school environment where she had trouble keeping pace academically. Some teachers misunderstood her learning difficulties, while classmates mocked the way she spoke and behaved, contributing to her feeling socially isolated and self-conscious. Susan later described herself not as unintelligent, but as a slow learner, someone who simply needed more time than others. Those experiences affected her confidence for many years. She became increasingly quiet and withdrawn socially, often feeling isolated from people around her. Despite those struggles, music became one of the few places where she felt confidence and emotional comfort. Through church choirs, local talent competitions, and singing at home, Susan discovered an area where she felt accepted and capable. Her mother, Bridget, strongly believed in her daughter's talent and encouraged her for years to audition for television programs, including Britain's Got Talent. But Susan resisted. By middle age, she was unemployed and believed major opportunities in life were becoming increasingly unlikely. She also believed television success was usually associated with younger and more commercially polished performers. Her responsibilities increased further as she spent years caring for her aging mother, while her own life remained centered around caregiving duties. When Bridget died in 2007, the loss affected Susan deeply, but it also left behind one final piece of encouragement that stayed with her afterward. Her mother had always believed she should sing publicly. For the first time, Susan decided to try. In 2009, she walked onto the Britain's Got Talent audition stage in Glasgow. Initial audience reactions were skeptical and dismissive. Before she even began singing, some people smirked at her appearance, age, and nervousness. Even the judges appeared uncertain about what to expect. Then the music for "I Dreamed a Dream" began, and audience reactions quickly shifted. The room became noticeably quieter as Susan Boyle started to sing. Audience reactions shifted dramatically once Susan began singing. In less than 3 minutes, Susan Boyle challenged many of the assumptions people had made about her before the performance even started. Amanda Holden later described the audition as one of the most memorable moments in talent show television. What many viewers realized in that moment was not only that Susan could sing, but that they had underestimated her before taking her seriously as a performer. Overnight, the audition became a global online phenomenon. The video spread extremely quickly for that period of internet media, reaching hundreds of millions of viewers and turning Susan Boyle into one of the most searched names in the world. Public figures, including Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher, praised her performance publicly, while many media outlets described her rise as unexpected and extraordinary. Her story resonated strongly with audiences around the world. Many viewers connected with themes of rejection, late success, and perseverance in her story. Susan finished second in the competition, but by then public attention had already made her internationally famous. Yet the sudden success also brought enormous pressure. Endless interviews, constant media attention, and overwhelming public expectations quickly became difficult to manage emotionally. In the weeks following the finale, Susan experienced significant physical and emotional exhaustion. Even amid the chaos, her new music career continued moving forward. In November 2009, Susan released her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream. The album became a major international success, selling more than 2 million copies in its first week and becoming one of the fastest-selling debut albums ever released by a female artist at the time. The girl, once mocked and underestimated during childhood, had become one of the most commercially successful singers in the world at that moment. For Susan personally, another part of the experience mattered deeply as well. The success proved that many of the people who had underestimated her throughout her life had been wrong about her abilities. By the time Susan Boyle became internationally known in 2009, she had already spent decades living through social isolation, health challenges, and limited opportunities. The standing ovation on Britain's Got Talent was not the beginning of those struggles. It was the first time her experiences received widespread public attention. In 2011, Susan began speaking more openly about personal struggles connected to her childhood, including epilepsy and learning difficulties that had affected her since childhood. The condition itself was difficult, but much of the challenge came from how people around her responded to it. Much of the difficulty came from how poorly epilepsy was understood at the time. During school, Susan sometimes experienced seizures in class, and some classmates reportedly reacted with ridicule rather than understanding, which made the experiences socially painful and embarrassing for her. The seizures became another source of bullying she had already experienced for years. At home, fear and confusion often shaped the way her condition was handled. Her parents sometimes struggled to respond consistently to her health and learning difficulties, and Susan later described feeling isolated during many of those experiences. At times, her father reportedly misunderstood her behavior as moodiness or difficultness rather than fear or emotional distress. Her epilepsy was also often associated with assumptions about her intelligence, contributing to negative perceptions about her abilities. Because many people around her did not fully understand her condition, some of her developmental and emotional challenges remained misunderstood for years. School became an increasingly difficult environment for her. Susan struggled academically in classrooms that had little flexibility for children who learned differently. She graduated with limited qualifications and entered adulthood often feeling her opportunities were restricted. She applied for numerous jobs but faced repeated rejection. Eventually, she completed a short cooking training placement at West Lothian College, though stable employment remained difficult to secure. Much of her early adulthood was spent participating in temporary government work programs while struggling to establish long-term stability in her own life. Throughout those years, music remained one of the most important sources of comfort and confidence in her life. She performed in local pubs, church gatherings, and small community venues for decades before becoming famous. Susan sang not because she expected major success, but because singing helped her feel calmer and more emotionally grounded. It also allowed her to express emotions she often struggled to communicate elsewhere. Long before millions knew her name, Susan Boyle was already performing regularly for small audiences with the same sincerity that later made her internationally famous. At the time, however, those performances attracted little public attention. Her personal life was also relatively private and isolated. During her Britain's Got Talent audition, Susan surprised many viewers when she openly mentioned that she had never been married and had never been kissed. The public reaction was mixed. Some people responded with kindness and admiration, while others reacted with mockery or disbelief. What many viewers did not fully understand, however, was how strongly years of isolation had affected Susan's confidence and social life. Susan did not grow up believing she was someone likely to attract attention or admiration. Over time, those experiences affected the way she viewed herself for many years. Even so, she continued trying to maintain a positive outlook. Her Catholic faith became an important source of stability and routine in her life. Susan spent years singing in church choirs, volunteering within her parish community, and visiting elderly people who were unable to leave their homes. Although fame later made her internationally recognizable, privately, Susan remained deeply attached to simplicity, routine, and religious faith. After her father died, several of Susan's siblings moved away, leaving her living primarily with her mother Bridget and her cat Pebbles in their family home. Susan spent many years helping care for her aging mother, something that received little public attention at the time. When Bridget Boyle died in 2007, the loss affected Susan very deeply. She later said she remained inside the house for days afterward and avoided answering calls or visitors. Susan also described feeling extremely isolated during that period. For most of her life, her mother had been one of the few people consistently encouraging her to continue singing and pursue larger opportunities. The experience also forced Susan to reconsider the direction of her life. She later described her life before fame as repetitive and ordinary, and after her mother's death, she began reconsidering opportunities she had previously avoided. So when Susan Boyle eventually appeared on the Britain's Got Talent stage in Glasgow, she was bringing years of personal struggle, caregiving responsibilities, and emotional hardship with her. The performance that attracted worldwide attention was not simply about revenge or sudden fame. It was also a moment where a woman demonstrated abilities many people had previously underestimated. By 2012, Susan Boyle had already become one of the most recognizable singers in the world. Many people viewed her as an example of unexpected late success. But behind the fame, the sold-out albums, and the standing ovations, Susan was still trying to better understand experiences she had struggled with for years. That year, doctors finally identified something that had affected her since childhood. Susan was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, specifically what was then referred to as Asperger's syndrome. Rather than devastating her, it was something she later described as relieving. The diagnosis helped explain many of the social difficulties, childhood confusion, and feelings of being socially out of place that had affected her for much of her life. In a BBC interview in 2013, Susan explained that for years she had incorrectly believed she suffered permanent brain damage at birth. Receiving the diagnosis did not erase painful experiences from her past, but it helped reduce some of the confusion and self-doubt she had carried for years. "It's a relief," she said quietly. "I understand myself better now." Around the same period, Susan also revealed that she had lived with epilepsy for many years, another condition connected to difficulties and bullying she experienced during childhood. In 2013, she was additionally diagnosed with type 2 diabetes after doctors warned that aspects of her lifestyle and diet were affecting her health. The diagnosis became another reminder that success had not removed ongoing health problems from her life. Susan responded to these challenges in the same way many people had come to recognize over the years, with directness, humor, and resilience. During interviews discussing dating and relationships, she often relied on self-deprecating humor, though her comments also reflected feelings of isolation she had spoken about publicly for years. Despite becoming internationally famous, Susan never fully embraced the traditional celebrity lifestyle often associated with global fame. She rarely pursued luxury, remained closely attached to Scotland, and publicly supported the Better Together campaign during the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. "I'm a proud, patriotic Scot," she explained, "but I'm not a nationalist." Even after global success, many aspects of Susan Boyle's personality remained unchanged. She continued living relatively privately in Scotland and often described the outside world as difficult and overwhelming at times. For a few extraordinary years after 2009, Susan Boyle no longer felt completely invisible to the world around her. The shy woman from Blackburn, who had spent much of her life feeling disconnected from many of the people around her, suddenly became one of the most recognizable voices in the world. Her audition on Britain's Got Talent became far more than a television moment. It made many viewers reconsider how quickly people judge others based on appearance, age, or social awkwardness. When Susan first walked onto the stage, many audience members laughed before she even began singing. She wore no glamorous styling and appeared visibly nervous under the stage lights. Some audience members smirked openly, and even parts of the judging panel seemed uncertain about what to expect. Then, "I dreamed a dream" began, and the audience reaction shifted almost immediately. The laughter disappeared and was replaced by applause and visible surprise. More than a successful audition, the performance challenged many of the assumptions people had made about her only moments earlier. Within days, Susan's audition spread rapidly across YouTube and became one of the most widely viewed clips of its era. News programs replayed the performance repeatedly, while audiences around the world reacted to the shy Scottish woman whose performance had surprised millions of viewers. Older recordings of Susan's singing also resurfaced online, including her 1999 performance of Crimea River. Many viewers were surprised to realize that she had possessed remarkable vocal ability for years, but had spent most of her life performing without widespread recognition. But behind the public success story, Susan herself struggled with the pressure of sudden international fame. Throughout the competition, she dealt with exhaustion, emotional stress, and growing media attention. After decades of living privately in Scotland, media coverage quickly expanded into her personal life, including discussions about her appearance, loneliness, and inexperience with relationships. Producers reportedly became concerned about her emotional well-being, though Susan continued performing despite the pressure. When Susan ultimately finished second behind the dance group Diversity, many viewers expressed surprise. But by then, the competition result mattered less than the impact her story had already created. For Susan personally, the experience represented a major turning point after years of insecurity and public doubt. Millions of viewers connected emotionally with her story, particularly older audiences, people who felt overlooked, and those who believed opportunities in life had already passed them by. Then came the success that helped establish Susan Boyle as a major international recording artist. In November 2009, she released her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream, and the album performed far beyond industry expectations. It sold more than 2 million copies worldwide within its first week, broke sales records in the United Kingdom, and became one of the best-selling female debut albums ever released. Amazon reported record-breaking pre-orders, while Billboard recognized Susan for one of the strongest debut sales weeks for a new female artist since SoundScan tracking began in 1991. By the end of the year, the album had sold more than 9 million copies globally and became the best-selling album in the world for 2009. Guinness World Records later recognized Susan for several major commercial milestones, including the fastest-selling female debut album and becoming the oldest woman to debut at #1 in the UK with a first album. Unlike many sudden television stars, Susan continued building a successful recording career with albums including The Gift in 2010, Someone to Watch Over Me in 2011, Standing Ovation, The Greatest Songs from the Stage in 2012, Hope in 2014, and A Wonderful World in 2016. Her personal life also changed in ways she had not expected earlier in life. In late 2014, Susan revealed that she had started seeing a man she met while touring in the United States, a doctor close to her own age, whom she described as possibly her first serious relationship. Despite her international success, Susan continued living in the modest childhood home in Blackburn where she had spent years caring for her mother. The house remained closely connected to her personal history and family memories. But over time, ongoing health issues and the demands of fame gradually affected her public activity. In April 2022, Susan suffered a minor stroke that affected both her speech and singing voice. For several months, she remained largely out of public view. When she returned during the June 2023 finale of Britain's Got Talent, standing once again on the stage that had first introduced her to the world, she revealed that she had fought like crazy to recover and sing again. Many viewers were reminded that Susan Boyle was still trying to overcome many of the same insecurities and personal challenges that had shaped much of her life, while continuing to show audiences that her voice and experiences still mattered. In 2019, Susan also marked 10 years in music with the release of 10, a collection celebrating some of the defining songs of her career. The project reinforced that her success had lasted far longer than many critics initially expected. At the same time, fans had also started noticing growing signs of physical exhaustion and ongoing health struggles. Time, illness, and years of emotional pressure had clearly affected Susan Boyle's life. Although her voice still carried warmth and strength, she appeared increasingly drawn toward a quieter and more private lifestyle, away from celebrity culture and constant media attention. Reflecting on the album, Susan said she felt grateful for the experience of creating the music and hoped listeners would enjoy it as much as she had enjoyed recording it. But behind her public success was a far more difficult adjustment to fame than many people realized. Britain's Got Talent turned Susan into an international celebrity almost overnight, and the sudden change created enormous pressure. Before appearing on the program, she had lived quietly in Scotland for decades. Suddenly, she was dealing with constant interviews, rehearsals, paparazzi attention, public criticism, and overwhelming media interest. Susan later acknowledged that adapting to that level of public exposure was extremely stressful. Smiling for cameras, answering deeply personal questions, and adjusting to non-stop attention became difficult for someone who had spent most of her life outside the spotlight. Although Susan became one of the emotional centerpieces of the competition, she ultimately finished second in the final. In the days afterward, the stress and exhaustion appeared to catch up with her. Media reports at the time described serious emotional exhaustion and stress-related health concerns following weeks of non-stop pressure. Some reports from behind the scenes described tense moments after the finale, including claims that Susan became visibly distressed backstage. Concerns about her well-being reportedly led to medical evaluation and rest at a private clinic shortly afterward. News of the situation spread rapidly across Britain and surprised many viewers who had mainly seen the inspirational side of Susan Boyle's rise to fame. The conversation soon shifted toward broader concerns about the pressures sudden celebrity can place on people who are unprepared for intense international attention. Britain's media regulator, Ofcom, reportedly considered reviewing concerns about whether enough attention had been given to contestant well-being during the intense media coverage surrounding the show, although no formal investigation ultimately moved forward. For Susan, the experience became a difficult adjustment to sudden international fame. She later realized she needed to approach her career more carefully and protect herself from the non-stop pace of the entertainment industry. Even so, tours, recordings, and worldwide attention continued placing heavy demands on her schedule. Despite periods of exhaustion and stress, Susan remained committed to performing for fans who connected strongly with her personality and music. Another important turning point came in 2013, when Susan Boyle received a diagnosis connected to many of the difficulties she had experienced since childhood. For decades, she had incorrectly been told that complications during birth had caused permanent brain damage, something that affected her confidence for many years. Doctors later diagnosed her with Asperger's syndrome, now recognized as part of autism spectrum disorder. Susan described the diagnosis as emotionally difficult but also helpful in explaining many experiences from earlier in her life. For years, she had struggled socially and often felt different from many people around her. Looking back, she realized she had spent much of her life misunderstanding those experiences. The diagnosis helped her better understand herself and allowed her to receive more informed support and explanation for challenges she had faced for years. In an interview with The Guardian, Susan said being labeled brain damaged throughout childhood had felt deeply unfair. She explained that she did not see herself as less capable than others, but as someone who experienced and processed situations differently. Susan also expressed hope that speaking publicly about her diagnosis might encourage greater understanding toward neurodivergent people. Many fans responded positively to her openness, and her willingness to discuss personal struggles strengthened the emotional connection many audiences already felt toward her. But even as Susan gained a better understanding of herself, she continued facing new health and personal challenges. That same year, she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, forcing major changes to her lifestyle and eating habits. One of the more difficult adjustments following her diabetes diagnosis was giving up chocolate, something Susan openly admitted she loved. Although the condition was identified early enough for treatment, adapting to diabetes while also learning more about her autism diagnosis became another major personal adjustment. Then came the global COVID-19 pandemic. Because of her health conditions, Susan became especially cautious during that period. For more than 2 years, she remained largely out of public life and avoided close contact with many of the musicians and producers she would normally work with while recording music. The pandemic also interrupted parts of her music career, leading many fans to wonder whether she would eventually return to performing regularly. But Susan's difficulties were not limited to fame or health issues. She also faced problems in her personal life. In 2010, after deciding to move into a larger property following her commercial success, Susan reportedly experienced repeated disturbances involving local troublemakers, including vandalism and attempted break-ins. The incidents reportedly caused her significant stress. Eventually, she chose to leave the property and return to the modest childhood home where she had spent most of her life, later allowing her niece to live in the larger house instead. For many people, the decision seemed unusual given Susan's international fame and financial success. But Susan often appeared far more comfortable in familiar surroundings than in a more public celebrity lifestyle. Her childhood home remained one of the places she knew best and continued to feel comfortable returning to over the years. Ongoing health issues, public attention, and emotional pressure eventually led Susan to step away from music for a period of recovery before gradually returning again in 2015. Even after years of personal and health challenges, she continued performing and recording music. Susan also experienced several painful family losses over the years. One of the most difficult came when her sister Bridie died from cancer at the age of 73. Bridie had been one of the family members who remained especially supportive of Susan, particularly during the difficult years following her sudden rise to fame. Losing her was a very painful experience for Susan. After Bridie's death, Susan also helped care for her niece, taking on additional family responsibilities during an already difficult period in her life. At the same time, fame also created tensions within Susan's family. Her sudden success brought significant wealth and international attention, and disagreements eventually emerged around financial matters. One serious conflict developed between Susan and her brother Jerry after she reportedly gave him £75,000 to help support his struggling business. According to Susan, Jerry had threatened suicide if she refused to help financially. Other family members later objected to the situation, and the disagreement eventually became a public family dispute discussed widely in the press. For years, the conflict remained unresolved and was difficult for Susan personally. But in 2016, the relationship eventually improved after Susan and Jerry reunited during an emotional meeting at Heathrow Airport helping resolve the long-running disagreement. For Susan and her family, the reconciliation was an important moment. Unfortunately, Susan's health struggles continued. In April 2022, she suffered a minor stroke that affected both her speech and singing ability, creating a serious health setback. For someone whose career depended heavily on singing, the recovery process was especially difficult. The stroke delayed future music plans and forced Susan into months of rehabilitation and recovery. In June 2023, Susan returned to the Britain's Got Talent stage and performed alongside the West End cast of Les Miserables in a performance of I Dreamed a Dream, the same song that first brought her worldwide attention 14 years earlier. After the performance, Susan publicly revealed for the first time that she had suffered a stroke the previous year. She admitted there had been moments when she feared she might never perform again, but said she had worked intensely through rehabilitation in order to return to the stage. Later, Susan shared on Instagram that she had undergone extensive vocal training to rebuild her singing strength following the stroke. For many fans, the performance represented an important comeback after her health struggles. Today, despite ongoing health issues and the lasting effects of the stroke, Susan continues pursuing music whenever her condition allows. The woman once dismissed as an outsider continues to maintain a loyal international fan base, not only because of her voice, but because of her openness about personal struggles and perseverance through difficult periods in her life. In June 2023, Susan Boyle returned to Britain's Got Talent, the stage where she first gained worldwide attention in 2009. Performing I Dreamed a Dream alongside the West End cast of Les Miserables, Susan publicly revealed for the first time that she had suffered a minor stroke in April 2022. The stroke affected both her speech and singing ability, leading to months of recovery away from public life. After the performance, Susan admitted there had been moments when she feared she might never return to the stage again. She said she had fought like crazy to recover and later explained that she underwent intensive vocal rehabilitation in order to sing again. For many longtime fans, the performance was particularly meaningful. It no longer represented only the woman who unexpectedly became famous in 2009, but also someone working to regain the singing ability that had shaped her career for years. Many viewers responded strongly to her willingness to continue performing despite major health setbacks. Susan's appearance showed clear signs of the physical and emotional impact of recovery, and the standing ovation she received reflected support for her recovery and return to performing. Then, in 2025, Susan shared another positive update. After years of recovery and uncertainty, she confirmed that she had returned to the recording studio and was feeling significantly stronger again. Susan admitted there had been a period when many people believed she might never perform again, but she had gradually rebuilt both her health and confidence. Although she no longer followed the demanding international schedules that once dominated her career, her return to music showed that she still remained committed to performing and recording. Now at 65, Susan Boyle lives a far quieter life than during the peak of her fame. Rather than the non-stop media attention that followed her after Britain's Got Talent, her life today appears more focused on health, privacy, and a slower routine. In recent years, Susan has also spoken openly about one personal regret she has discussed publicly: never having children. Despite her success and global fame, she has also admitted to feeling lonely at times. Susan now keeps much of her private life out of public attention. Over the years, reports have suggested she may have quietly maintained a relationship with an American man whose identity has remained largely private. In 2016, Susan mentioned during an interview that she had spent time with an American doctor she met while touring, although she described the relationship as not especially serious at the time. Later reports suggested the relationship may have quietly continued in the background of Susan's life, largely away from media attention. Even after becoming internationally famous, Susan continued living in a very private and grounded way. According to people close to her, the man in her life has occasionally joined her during birthdays and family celebrations, but Susan has shown little interest in discussing the relationship publicly. After spending much of her life under public scrutiny, privacy appeared to become increasingly important to her. Over the years, public perception of Susan Boyle changed many times. Some people viewed her as an unexpected talent discovery, while others saw her as an inspirational figure whose story connected with audiences around the world. But beyond those public labels was also someone trying to build a quieter and more stable life after decades of personal struggles, health problems, public pressure, and serious concerns about whether she would be able to sing again following her stroke. Today, Susan no longer appears focused on the level of fame and publicity that surrounded her after Britain's Got Talent. However, she still continues to focus on music, and fans continue paying close attention whenever she performs publicly or releases new material. Many listeners have remained emotionally connected not only to Susan's voice, but also to the personal experiences and struggles reflected throughout her story. And for many longtime followers, Susan Boyle's journey reflects experiences that go far beyond entertainment alone. Loneliness, rejection, late success, illness, recovery, and the challenge of rebuilding confidence after difficult periods in life. If Susan Boyle's story connected with you, leave a like in support of her journey and subscribe for more stories exploring the personal lives and experiences behind well-known public figures. And let us know in the comments, what part of Susan Boyle's story stayed with you the most? For many fans, what remains most memorable is not only her commercial success or record sales, but the fact that she continued performing and returning to music despite years of illness, pressure, and personal struggles.